Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Esther, and I'm the curator here at Union Hall. I'm very excited to share with you more details about Through Flesh to Infinity and how it all came about. We also have Vinni and A here as well, so they're going to share a little bit about their practice, and you can feel free to chime in and ask questions. I would like to thank our sponsors tonight, Colorado Community Foundation and Colorado Creative Industries as well. Without them, we certainly wouldn't be here, and so we appreciate all of the support. So yeah, when I was first getting to know Vinni's work, well, I've known Vinni for a while, and I've been a fan of his work for a long time. Then I recently learned about A's work, and was sort of toying with this idea of having a two-person show. And so Vinni's pieces are mostly the 2D paintings, and A's pieces are the large-scale sculptural pieces here. And they're very different, and I was really looking, but I felt like they really complemented each other so much with all of these vibrant colors and textures and playfulness. And so the more I kind of looked into the work, the more I really saw these themes popping out of sort of opposing characteristics within one being. And I felt like it really spoke to the human condition. And of course, Vinni's pieces are figurative, so they really speak to the human condition in that way. But the more I looked at the work, I saw themes of like transcendence, sort of intertwined within physical experience. And I got really excited about that and sort of thinking about how that might work or like be a part of each one of these pieces and how they play off of each other. Yeah, there's this kind of through line connecting the grotesque or the corporeal and this idea of the infinite when you really, well, at least that's the story that I really saw coming out of them. I think you can interpret them for yourself, or like the artist may interpret them a little differently as well. But I feel like it's often through our physical experience as humans with the earth, through the grotesque, through the corporeal, that we have this opportunity to really understand or even grasp the infinite and this idea of infinity. And so that's where the title, Through Flesh to Infinity, comes from. Yeah, it's really about transcendence and transformation within the human experience. And so throughout the exhibition, you'll see themes of opposing ideas kind of coming together, like refinement and chaos, or containment and flow, which you can see within the fountain, and sort of like external and internal, or positive and negative. This piece here is called Pinfall, and this is one of Vinni's paintings. And as you can see, there's this kind of like a vibrant explosiveness here. There's these sort of textured, barnacle-like, almost creature-like pieces on the figures that I think really point to the complexity of internal struggle and external forces. So again, there's this like internal, external thing going on, but then the other thing with this piece that's more narrative is kind of like you can't really tell if they're fighting or if it's more of an embrace. And so that also is kind of playing into all of these ideas at the same time. And then as you kind of walk through here, we have these two pieces. This is A's Purpuro 7, and then this piece is called Yoke. And I really loved kind of having fun playing with I guess, piecing them, placing them together because of the large-scale orange circle here, and then you're playing with like the positive and the negative space side by side. But then also this piece, Yoke, is just like so magical and really is kind of speaks to fertility, which I think also ties into the idea of infinity and cycles in nature and patterns within the human experience as well. Yeah, I truly love how playful these two pieces are together. And then as you kind of move this way towards the exhibition, there's another piece of A's here that I have a hard time pronouncing. I think it's Paporosusia or something like that. Okay. And this piece is, like I said, it has those kind of like positive, negative, mirrored effect here. And it's really meant to kind of lead you into the lightbox work too of Vinni and A, or Vinni's positive and negative works here with the lightbox portraits. Okay, there's more. Yeah, so with A's pieces, I was really, really drawn to just the contrast in texture. A works a lot with, is a ceramicist, but also works a lot with non-traditional materials and will bring in things like paper pulp or copper or found objects. And it's hard to tell like that's what's happening. So I at first thought of A as a ceramicist and then got to know their practice and realized there's like just a lot more going on there. And there is this kind of, when you really look at the material that they're working with, you realize that like the paper pulp, transforms from a liquid to a solid. So does the metal, and then there's a whole transformation process sort of baked into the ceramic process as well. And so there is this idea of transformation and transition within a vessel, and you can kind of view them as these vessels or these totems. There's so many different ways to view them. I really think they're just really beautiful and stunning, and so much bigger in person than when you're looking at them online. But yeah, I would love to, this is kind of a brief introduction, but I would love to hear more from the artists as well. Just Vinni and A, whoever feels like speaking first. I think anything that you would love to share about your practice, about your experience with this exhibition, and then, yeah, we can go from there.
Talk about this one.
Yeah.
Standing in front of it.
I'm going to give you the mic.
Oh, there's a mic? You can turn that off.
Is it okay?
You could turn that off. This is a microphone? Do I have to talk like into it?
No, don't hold it too close. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's for the camera. I was like, I don't hear it mic'd up anywhere.
Yeah.
I got it. Oh, that's better. Yeah, without the water running. Yeah, this big piece here. I think when we started the show, we talked a lot about like we were talking about the garden, and I think the initial idea was like this idea of like nature, synthetic nature versus like actual nature. So I think that's like it turned into something different, but I think starting that piece, I had that idea in mind, and there was I saw this image, and it kind of reminded me of like this idea of like the Garden of Eden, which is like this projection of like perfection or like serenity, but there's this like world they're living in. This is kind of like a narrative take on it. There's like this world they're living in where it's like this mucky, complex, overwrought kind of thing, and then there's this simple form, and the simple form kind of represents this idea of like purity or like something we're reaching towards or something that seems nice, and we're living here, but we aspire for this thing, this idea of simplicity or something like that. And I think like even with A's stuff, like the simplicity of form, but like the complexity of texture kind of plays into that idea of like the paradox of the show and like what we're living through versus what we aspire towards, or complexity versus simplicity. So I think that was kind of the impetus for that one, as far as like the context of what we were talking about the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yoke, and I mean the idea of yoke didn't come till afterwards. I like the idea of the Trinity and like this self-contained kind of ecosystem of the egg. Like, that wasn't the idea when I started, but then these white shapes kind of started coming up. I mean, I think it's all just kind of an action reaction. Like, I think that the hands ended up being that way because they are interacting with that simplistic form and kind of like this transition from that outside context I was talking about, like the muckiness and the complexity, transitioning into the simplicity, and almost this like they don't belong together, like almost like a rejection of the two. Like they almost can't coexist, but they inevitably do. That's what I think. I mean, like, this is all stuff after it's made. Like, there's never like, oh, this is what this is gonna mean. But when I look at it now, I see this like this high tension point of the physical interaction between their hands and this object of intention or affection or grandiosity or whatever you want to call it.
Really quick, I have a question for you. When you are working on a painting like this, like, how do you balance the narrative and the storytelling aspect with sort of the aesthetic and the visuals of the piece?
I planned for this question. I planned for all of them. It doesn't sound like it now, though. I think they're one and the same. Like, one doesn't exist without the other, I guess. So and I would almost say like the storytelling aspect is secondary to the physical properties of the thing, like, or like the physical interaction of what's happening in the space creates the narrative.
So it kind of comes out.
Yeah.
Shows itself to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense. Cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess one thing that I'll say is whenever you were talking, I was thinking about, I don't remember exactly your language, but you were talking about the kind of like potentiality or like the different...
Like are you talking about like the form or the...
Like thinking about like imagination and like where this could, I don't know, but like one of the things that you said made me think about like making some, like the difference between the world that we're in now and then the future worlds.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And I think about similar things in my work where I'm making something here with the materials that I have now, but I think it's largely about thinking about like the not yet here, which is an idea written by Jose Munoz, which is a queer theorist. And I think that for me, the objects take up space as a way of like holding space for things that maybe don't exist now but could exist in the future. And that's also why I like the idea of like maybe like vessels or like shapes, like kind of relating to like Vinni's like round shape. This one being like dimensional, but then also like kind of carving out space through its negative space. But yeah, yeah,
there's something like the hollow of the whole, and I think that's probably why you like them paired together, like the circle versus like the absence of the circle. Mm-hmm. And like I think that in this piece it speaks to like that potential, like with that hollowed out, it like leaves room for a story to be told rather than telling it specifically.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this, I mean, the absence of that middle kind of gets me there with this one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, like a total maybe like happy accident is like that being like a really brightly colored, like gorgeous paint, and then like having glitter that's like light reflecting, and then looking at this object with this lighting, it's like, okay, well this is like a similar color tonality, and then like the little pieces of like sand or like mica flecks are like almost like having that same kind of like glitteriness. Yeah. So I think it's like just another way of the of like seeing like a duality or something that's like translated in a different way, but maybe saying a similar type of thing.
Cool. Actually, I'm going to ask you
a
question. This is a more broad question about your work, because I know like you use a lot of non-traditional materials, but then you also embed them within your ceramic pieces. And so they do kind of undergo that metamorphic journey, you know, encapsulating the idea of transformation. But can you talk about just how that symbolism exists within your process and maybe how it applies to your work on a broader scale?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, vessels, they have like, their purpose is usually to hold something, like to hold something in the interior space. But one of the things that I love so much about surfaces is like our ability to embed something like actually in the skin of it as well. So I think for me, that's one of the things that I'm able to do is like to think about ways that like content can exist metaphorically. So I guess maybe to ground that in a more concrete example, like for the one on the far end, I had this, like these pieces of charcoal that had like a sentimental value to me. And so I thought it would be really nice to like have a place to put them where they, you know, that place can kind of like take up more space or have more of a presence of something than just like these little pieces of charcoal. And I was able to do that by creating like a paper pulp that has the charcoal mixed in with it and then like putting it on the surface of the form, so that way it's like kind of holding it but maybe in a different way. Is that where your question was going? I may have sidetracked it.
Yeah, I mean really just about the process and the materiality and how you work with it and just how it like informs your practice.
Yeah. I also really like things that don't really go together. So the ceramic, I like the metallic glaze because it kind of takes on an appearance of something like hammered metal, which would be really strong and like has different properties than ceramic. And then the paper being painted with like a terracotta clay then starts to look more like a raw clay. Or like doing something like on that end where like I made one form and then like recreated it digitally, milled it out of foam, and then was able to like repeat it. And I really like just doing things that, you know, you kind of aren't really like supposed to do. Like if we were making pottery and we were doing it correctly, we wouldn't really be able to add things like paper or foam to it for obvious reasons. Like you don't really want a coffee cup that, you know, has like a paper handle. But I like being able to take those like associations from one thing and then like compare it to something that's similar but different, or like maybe I've gotten to read from people that like the top one looks like concrete, and then, you know, to find out that it's actually like a really light paper can maybe like shift how we're seeing it, which then like adds another layer to like ideas of like translation.
Cool.
Thanks.
I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
Just in terms of materiality, I mean, you know, how does that dictate the overall structure? Looking at this, I mean, you have such a dense object on the bottom that grounds something, but then here the dense object is suspended above, yet it's so light on the bottom. So when sculpting these, how does that dictate, you know, the materiality going into that to make sure it's balanced and structurally sound?
That's a great question. I think it kind of happens, it feels very like bodily, like we all have weight and it almost kind of doesn't really make sense for us to be able to stand, but then we kind of can. I feel like I'm going for the same thing with these, like they're actually like a little bit stronger than they look in some instances, but it's like the weight, if it is top heavy, needs to be like centered, kind of like a baby with like a really big head or something. Like.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's talk about the fountain. Yeah. Yeah. So the fountain is.
Can we turn it on again?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe after.
Let's do one.
So this piece is called Water Feature. Oh, I'll wait for you. This piece is called Water Feature, and this is a collaboration between Vinni and A. When I originally was speaking to them about doing a joint show, Vinni thought, oh, I want to create a fountain because Vinni has created fountains in the past. And then A had been talking about wanting to make a fountain, so it just only made sense for them to work on one together. And so it happened. But these ceramic pieces here are A's, and then the small floral ceramics are also A's, and then Vinni constructed the human figure. And there's so much to say about this, really. It's grotesque, and it's a person vomiting, which, you know, you can say a lot about purging, and then that purging going back, kind of back into the earth. There's this like closed loop cyclical system going on here with this piece. So it's very much speaking to this idea of like fleshiness being connected to infinity and cycles that just are way bigger than us. And these moments of vulnerability, you know, also speaking to the idea of expansion. And yeah, so I'm in love with this piece, absolutely adore it. It was a complete unexpected collaboration between Vinni and A. And so I would love to hear a little more from you guys about just the challenges or the joys or the ideas behind how this came together.
Come with me. Well, we didn't know what to call it at first, and we had a kind of crappy name for it at first, I think. It was like A and Vinni's Fountain Extravaganza or something like that.
We're very creative.
I like the idea water feature because it kind of pointed to this idea of like frivolity, like a water feature is nice, but it's not necessary. It's like kind of like this, it's like a bragging right, like, yeah, I got this water feature. And the idea of like a monument, I was thinking a lot about, or like at least when I built my first fountain, I was thinking about the idea of like monuments or, which can be in the way of fountains, but like it's kind of like an ode or like an honoring of somebody or something. Like there's this like, again, like this grandiose idea of like if you're taking the time to make a statue of something, then it's like canonizing that thing. And usually like the history of monuments is either like people or an event, but this is like kind of ambiguous. It's not a specific person. Maybe the event is him purging, but it's like taking this idea of frivolity and like what do we actually value. And when I think of this, it's kind of like an homage to the less grandiose sides of the person. Like it's a stripped down idea of a person. It's not necessarily romantic or, well, I mean, there is the ceramic, like it's built up in that way, but there's this gross act, and it's more of like an ode to the lesser parts of the self, like an homage. That when I look at it after the fact, I think of like an homage to the self, or like a humbling of the self, or remembering those kind of vulnerable parts of the self, which I like the idea of someone vomiting into a fountain. It's supposed to be this grandiose, beautiful thing. And I was actually telling Esther, somebody else told me recently a story about Versailles, like this beautiful palacey building, and they have fountains, but they would actually have to have people go up to they would like tour people around the property, and then they'd have to like hire people to skip ahead to turn the fountains on, because they didn't have enough water power to like power all the fountains. So there's this like facade to this like, it's beautiful and perfect and esteemed, but there's like this maintenance that has to go into it, and it's really just to show off the water feature.
Yeah, I love that. I think of like similar things but different. I spend more time than I probably should thinking and talking about ceramics, and I'm interested in how little of that time, like in school or classes or whatever, we spend talking about things like bricks or toilets, things that are also ceramic, but I think we try not to think of them. So it's like we could talk about a teapot until we're blue in the face, but the toilet has just as much design and, arguably as much, if not more, importance in our society for, practical uses and otherwise. But so I think taking something that maybe is seen as a lower art form, which, ceramics tends to carry those connotations sometimes of something that's not quite art, lives in a decorative space. I'm not saying I agree with that, but it could be something that is brought into the conversation, then relating it to things like toilets or fountains that kind of live in that in between, to me is very interesting. So I think to bring it back to the fountain, I also think about how Esther was saying about the systems and the closed loops for things. And I think things like cups or toilets can remind us of that kind of loop where we're interacting with vessels. It's like our body is a vessel, then we're also interacting with this other thing. So that's kind of what got me interested in fountains, being able to make something where there's tubes and spouts and it goes in and comes all the way around, but then doing it in a super straightforward and literal way where it becomes part of the piece, I think was super fun. Just a great happy accident, I think.
Well, I like the toilet thing, and you say that, I mean, I can see the kind of folky connotations to ceramics, but I also think of porcelain, the idea of the porcelain toilet, and porcelain is held as this fragile, very something to be taken care of kind of thing.
Right.
So I like that kind of flip on it too, or it's this very grotesque act, but there is this fragility to it, or something kind of sweet and sensitive about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the intimacy of a toilet. If you're ever really up close and personal with a toilet, maybe it's because you're sick and you're on the bathroom floor, and maybe you're looking at it in a way that you haven't before.
And then
it's kind of the reverse, right? Of something that's beautiful, and taking this figure to reconfigure what this is.
I like that idea of the perceived beauty of a monument. I guess that's what but Esther was saying, we both want to do fountains, but we're approaching them from completely different angles. Those were my thoughts on it, but your idea of the fountain as a vessel is a completely different thought, and I think that brought a lot of cool light to this collaboration. It became something different.
How has this collaboration or working collaboratively just influenced your practice individually? I'm just curious.
I think so. I feel generally maybe nervous to collaborate with people because it's a whole other element. You don't know what's going to happen. But I think working with Vinni makes me think that maybe it's something I want to do more of. I think just because you're really good at working with other people, and we've talked a little bit about this, you having a lot of experience and building up that skill set. So I think for me it was really great because I think it opens up future opportunities to do collaborations in the future. And I also think my practice is nowhere at a point where I would want to be sculpting something figurative, especially life scale. But working collaboratively, I get to do that and see how this would be if the work that maybe is figurative turned into an actual figure, without actually having to do any of that. So I feel, really good about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, like, collaboration has always been kind of a part of it. Even like my sister's here, we used to do like add-ons, like where you would draw a picture, then hand it off to somebody else, so then they would add what they wanted to, and then they'd hand it back to you. And like, I think we approached this kind of in the same way, where it wasn't like we're standing over each other's shoulders like, oh, but this is what I would do and this is what I would do. Like, it was kind of this, do what you're gonna do, hand it off. So there's this aspect of like letting go, or like kind of giving it to the universe at B, or like just letting it go, getting rid of a little bit of control, which has always been like a very powerful part of making things for me. And I mean, I have moments where I want full control over something, but I think some of the coolest stuff that I've been a part of making are, collaborations where you don't have total control. And I think that we did that pretty well, like handing it off to each other and trusting each other, trusting the things around us, trusting Esther, trusting each other. And I mean, I think that's where like unexpected, like really cool things happen. And yeah, this is like an avenue to explore more things because of that, for sure.
Nice. Okay, I have another question for both of you. So this is kind of long-winded, but the exhibition is kind of described as like a mix of paradoxes that define us as humans. And so how do you see your individual artistic practices contributing to that exploration, and what aspects of the human experience do you find the most compelling to portray?
I prepared for this one too. Hand it to me, put me in. I liked this question, and I like wanted to answer it as, so the second part was, what do you find the most compelling to portray? Yeah. And I think that there's a paradox in that. In like, I tend to portray like moments of uncertainty or vulnerability or fear or general sense of the sublime. Is it like when people are going through something that they recognize there's something kind of like outside themselves, uncertainty, being unsure of a situation. I think that those are the moments that I can relate to most when I'm talking to somebody. Those are the things that like compel me to create, or that I can relate to more. It's I guess I was like thinking about this in like, if you're talking to somebody who has it all figured out, like, hey, yeah, my stocks are rising, and like I know what I'm making tons of money, and my life is perfect. Like, those tend to be conversations that I'm less engaged with, or I can't relate to them as much. So I tend to sway towards making work that represents those kinds of ideals. But the paradox in that is that I want to figure it out. Like, I want to know. I want to be set. So even in the things that I am gravitating, and the value I find in this uncertainty, there's still this like paradox, which I think you're talking about in the overall show, of like, but you still want to nail it, and you still want to be sure, and you don't want uncertainty. We all want to be comfortable, I guess, while simultaneously recognizing that that's not that interesting. Huh?
The yolk. Yeah.
The yolk. The yolk. Yeah.
I think for me, my favorite thing to think about in terms of like the human paradox, or is like how, like our ability to adapt as humans, and our ability to undergo changes continuously. And I think for me, ceramics is such an interesting place to do that because of all of like the continuous transitions. Like, you know, we go from mushy, weird material to something that's hard, and then it can be like shiny. And then maybe when it comes out of the kiln, like we might think of it as done or finished, like this object is complete. From here, it really could only be ruined or broken, like, you know, going back to our toilet analogy, like if you break the toilet, then maybe it's done. But I think I really like to kind of like keep pushing that. Like what's so exciting for me about something like this is, okay, well, like the top part is made of two like sink pedestal pieces that were then glazed together, so then it can like still become a new object. And then, you know, when Vinni makes a sculpture, you know, that helps it become a fountain, you know, then it undergoes another change. You know, taking something out of the kiln and it's not quite right, so being able to add paper pulp to it to, you know, kind of change the way it looks, or paint on top of it. So I think for me, like the constant shifts become really exciting.
Nice. Okay. I think those are all the questions that I have for you both.
Sweet.
So I would love to open it up to the audience if you guys have any questions for any of us.
You brought up that the paper cup for like the mug from coffee, like that's like a visceral memory of mine. Mm-hmm. Is that like the inspiration for that piece, or?
That's a great question. I think it's like, it's not necessarily like the inspiration, but I think like it's the maybe like reason why I'm interested in the two different materials. Like one being like like people always talk about how ceramics can last forever. Like, and the oldest objects that we have that were made by humans are ceramic. So, and like paper being the exact opposite of that. I think that's, so maybe not like exact, like I just kind of made that up, the cup with the paper handle, but yeah, the two kind of like not really going together.
You may have made that up, but when you said that,
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it, kind of felt that memory inside of myself, seeing something completely different just from what you were saying.
And that's another thing that I love about like materials and shapes, like that we could maybe have a shared like physical sensation without me ever like saying anything to you is like, I don't know, to me that's so exciting and weird.
I've got one for Vinni. The fierceness of your brush strokes on like a large piece that is a little bit more expressive, how do you wrangle that in for something more of a portrait, something that's a little bit more representative of a direct photograph of a figure or something more recognizable? How do you wrangle that in through that process?
I think that I think I tackle everything as like an abstraction. Like I tend to stray away from like source images that are of or like a specific person. Like I don't really paint pictures of people I know. Like they're usually like old photographs, and I guess I don't think of any of like even these as like portraits necessarily. It's hard to explain. Like the abstractions are bodies in themselves. Like so everything that plays a part of that bigger figure is like its own figure, and then the bigger figure is just a sum of all the parts of these smaller figures. So it's all kind of an abstraction. Like I try not to be, I don't want to make it too literal of like this is a specific person, because then there's no like entry point for the viewer to like relate or almost insert themselves into it. So there's always a constant like, how do I make this not too ambiguous but not too specific? I don't know if that answers that question at all. Okay.
I do have another question. the flowers that you created on the fountain, why?
Great question. Well, I don't know. Everything's like kind of twofold, like actual a practical reason, like why is this scale? Like, oh, it's because that's how big the kiln is. But also too, like I think for like the practical reason was like a way to create like the two different materials coming together. But also once I thought about it, it was like the way the little like texture flowery things to me like reference the texture of Vinni's materials so well. So I felt like it was kind of a way for us to, you know, get that same like duality in the work and kind of like I think his material makes mine look different and my material makes his look different. And then there's also like one other piece on the back that has that same texture. So it was nice to kind of like bring that in another way.
Yeah, I think it works compositionally overall, like bringing these two mediums together and kind of creating like a visual path where you're not really sure where one material starts and the other one ends, I guess. It's a little bit more cyclical, like the fountain, even like it just like kind of draws the eye around. And like I did one of these in just spray foam, and I think like the ceramic adds like so much to it. I think that they complement each other really well. And then when I saw that you were doing these flowers, and you even showed me the little technique you were using, I tried to make a few. Mine were a little shittier.
You were great. 10 out of 10.
But then that was before I think I even saw the piece that you did that's made up of all of that. But yeah, I think like, and the orange ties it into that painting, and then the form ties it into that sculpture, and so there almost is like a narrative through material that we're trying to create, bringing pieces of different things into like one, I think.
Yeah.
So.
I love that there is this theme of orange, like, you know, like with those works and this work, because I think it's really interesting. Orange, obviously a color can have so many meanings, but when I think of orange, I also think of like the orange robes that Buddhist monks wear, and that in Buddhism that color is representative of spirituality. Yeah, I don't know.
Like that cyclical thing too.
Just a side note. Anyone else have any comments or questions?
I asked a really kind of open-ended question for both of you. I'm interested, we've talked a lot about like the painting and sculptures and all these. I'm wondering about the light boxes and how those kind of play and what that experiment was with the negative and like what that kind of thought process or how you got there. I'm also interested, kind of a follow-up. Similarly, the piece that's like 3 pieces on the ground that's kind of over here in the back. It seems like it's very similar, but it's an outlier where these other ones are kind of like these large kind of body figures. I'm interested just about those two kind of outlier pieces for the outliers, but you know, a little different, little expansion of the materials.
That's it, telling us
Yeah,
to go
and also
over
like
here.
shift into the gallery.
Yeah. Where'd you go away? Oh, there you are. Okay,
Yeah.
thank God. Well, I guess you asked about the light boxes. I'll explain the light boxes a little bit. So the titles of the light boxes are pictures of paintings of photos of ghosts. So it's convoluted, which is like kind of the nature of it. It's like, I guess I was thinking about this source material, which is old photographs, and it's already once removed from the actual person, like from like 1834, like when photographs were like originating. It's like so it's once removed from the photograph, from the person itself as a photograph, and then I'm painting it in these ones, and then I'm printing it, and then I'm flipping it. So it's this like convoluted like detachment from the source. And so like the idea of the ghost is like the idea of something rather than the thing itself. So I mean, I think it's like I think that's where like a lot of like magic happens, like where you're convoluting something, or like you're really like digging into all these different angles, or what could this be, like, and these layers of, I can't think of a good synonym for convolution, but so these layers that take the thing further away from itself, but it's the idea of the thing, but it's not the thing. Distortion, dilution, yeah. I mean, I think if I took it further, like it maybe eventually would just become like a white thing, like a blank, like ghostly. So I like the idea of the thing itself versus what it actually becomes over time, or what it represents, I guess. I don't know if that answers it at all, but
I mean, that was like a very similar reaction like when I first viewed the show. Like it took me a second to understand that they were flipped and opposites and like the connections between the two, and they felt like four different objects, and then like you kind of slowly understood the relationship, but they're also vastly different objects with the same that's
well, even like even the they're printed on like translucent vellum, and if I flip them around, it's actually the correct way to show them backlit, so it actually has more detail. And that's how I was going to do it, but like, no, it's too much. Like I need to like dilute it more, so it's like a specific effort to like further yourself from the thing in order to understand it more, maybe.
I know you asked about this piece, but I have ants for a brain, so could you remind me one more time?
I was just wondering about it. It feels different. It's a horizontal. It's like kind of a step between multiple different things rather than like the two shoved together sort of thing. It's like, I don't know, I'm just interested in your thoughts behind it. Like, what were you thinking? What are these thoughts that are percolating between the two? And yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, maybe I can explain this by talking about this one and a little bit of what Vinni was saying about like how you have to like continuously distort the thing or like redo it. And I think you mentioned doing things in like a super convoluted way. Like for this piece over there, I used like a digital process where now I have like, so I start out with a drawing and then I make an object and then the object becomes like digital. So now it's like, okay, does it even really exist if it exists in the digital world? And then it like comes back into our world and then, you know, you can make a drawing of it and keep going from there. But I think translating that idea, I realized that like one of the things that I was interested in about that object was the handles, how the handles kind of become a tube. And it's like referencing these stirrup vessels where the handle and the body and the spout are all connected. So it's kind of like this moment of like, where does one stop and the other one begin? So then like thinking of those tubes, I was like, you know, other tubes like plumbing or piping. So then, you know, we have like actual copper pipe, but then what happens if I polish it so shiny that maybe it starts to look more like glaze? And then this one's also kind of about this like mathematic principle called Lemon's Gate of, I think it's Hieronymo, but I might be saying that wrong. But anyway, this is like kind of how a Klein bottle would look in another reality where there is like the z-axis or something. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, you know, with digital, you get to see like, okay, here's the thing, and then here's it flipped beneath the floor that we can actually like do in real life because we have real floors. So I think it's like, it's all about like, how do I visualize this thing that doesn't really exist in our world, I guess, maybe to put it more concisely.
I really love this piece too, because I feel like there's like this tension between the three objects and yet they're connected, and it really kind of shares that moment with Vinni's watercolor here. There's this tension between these two figures, and like, again, it's hard to tell whether or not they're embracing or whether or not they're struggling. Yeah, and so I really like that pairing. And then if you really look at this piece here, the ceramic piece, there is this figure eight within the blue section, and I really like that sort of infinity, it's just like a little nod to the idea of infinity. And this is the textured piece that Vinny was talking about earlier when you were talking about the flowers on the fountain. And I just love how this also really connects with the textures in Vinny's pieces as well.